People who go into people's houses for their job. What is the strangest or creepiest thing you've ever seen? I was doing some work with an engineering firm and there was a lady who was complaining about severe moisture and water buildup in her apartment. After checking with all the other apartments around her and nobody else complaining, we went to investigate. We knock on the door and the second she lets us in we are hit smack in the face with a wall of humidity. I mean like standing in Vietnam during monsoon time humidity. It is hot, extremely humid, and just walking 5 feet in you are already saturated with water. We start the investigation and notice her carpet is soaked everywhere. Just squish squish as we walked through. I get to her sliding glass doors to her patio and no word of a lie there are 2-foot tall mushrooms growing out of her carpet. The water built up so badly on the glass doors and dripped down onto the carpet she had a 10-foot by 10-foot mushroom garden growing. Turns out the cause for it was found when I opened her closet. She had her son sneak in a clothes washer and dryer one night and installed them into her closet without having proper plumbing for the washer and absolutely no ventilation for the dryer. So all the humidity from the dryer and washer was trapped in the apartment. I had to crawl under this woman's duplex to run a wire. In her living room she had 4 dogs in a cage that was nailed to the floor. Under the floor in the same spot were stalactites from where the dogs had been peeing over the years. Another time we went to this woman's house. You could smell the horrible smell outside in the driveway. We tried the front door but were told to go around back. We could not get in the front door because the door was blocked by used diapers. We then made our way around the garbage to the bathroom where her husband had taken the computer apart in the bathtub. Most of his tools were rusted together, sitting in the sink. This is no exaggeration, there was something growing out of the toilet onto the floor of this bathroom. There was garbage everywhere in this home. What was sad was the woman had a baby in there. All she could talk about was being happy that the state gave her baby back to her. I felt uncomfortable on many levels. A few years ago I was cleaning apartments with a local carpet cleaning company. One day we got a call to go clean a rented house and they said that the door would be unlocked and to go ahead in. The tenants had apparently moved out and we would have nothing bothering us as we cleaned. Good deal, I thought to myself, no need to move furniture, etc. When we arrived we opened the door and were immediately hit with an awful stench. We chalked it up to being another hot, humid Iowa summer day and did not read too much into it. We put on our respirators and got to work. While I was pre-spraying the carpets, I was opening all the doors to see if there was any carpet inside and if they needed cleaning. I opened one closet and almost fell back in shock. Lying on the floor in front of me was a goat's head with a horrible smell. Needless to say, I bolted as my partner looked at me and said, "What happened to you?" Too late, I was already outside breathing in some much needed air. 2 seconds later, he was right there beside me, pale as a ghost. I was a case manager for adults with developmental disabilities. I had a client who had a moderate to severe cognitive disability and lived by himself in his own apartment. One day when I went to check up on him, I knocked on the front door and a different man opened the door. The man who answered the door frantically started talking to me about my job, money, banks. He looked homeless and on drugs. My client was lying on the couch, not moving or talking. After about 10 minutes of trying to figure out what the heck was happening, I heard someone come in through the back door of the apartment. The first guy went back into the bedroom and I could hear him arguing with the man who entered the back door. The first guy came out and tried to tell me that it was just the TV, as the second guy walked out of the bedroom right behind him. They started to ask me if I could give them a ride to the bank. I noped the heck out of there. I told my client to call me at my office. I called the apartment front desk to let them know what was going on. I called the police to make a report. The next day they took my client to the ATM and robbed him at gunpoint, despite everything I tried to do without putting my own life in danger. I spent the next several months helping my client move and getting his finances and everything back in order. When I was in university my wife and I worked for a large property management company managing a medium-sized apartment complex in kind of a sketchy neighborhood. We had a lot of interesting, entering apartment, experiences, but one we tell people about all the time. There was a really nice couple who we did not see often, but any time we did they were very pleasant and seemed completely normal. One month they came and gave notice that they would be moving. During their last month there I put a notice under their door that I wanted to show their apartment. They came to me, told me they had a bit of cleaning to do, and asked if I could hold off showing their apartment for a few days. The unit 1 floor above them was vacant and was the exact same floor plan, so I agreed. A week or so later we rented the upper unit and now I wanted to show their unit again. I put notice under their door. The next day I noticed that the corner of the notice was still sticking out from under the door. I had not seen the occupants for a few days, so I entered their apartment. The stench in their apartment was overwhelming. On the floor was about 4 inches of wood chips and waste covering the entire floor, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, everywhere. There were cages in one room and multiple books about breeding guinea pigs. It was revolting. We had the apartment gutted down to bare studs and to the subfloor. After the repairs it still smelled off. The residents dropped their keys off at my apartment in the middle of the night with a note that said, "Sorry." Never heard from them again. I once had to go to a house to install a computer and I should have known it would be bad when the directions I was given led to a condemned house. I called the customer and said that the only house at the address she gave me was a condemned house, and she stated that that was indeed her house and it was just a little messy. The lawn, covered in piles and piles of junk. Absolutely no grass, just garbage, feet and feet high. I had to climb over all of this mess with a computer just to reach the collapsed porch that was held up by piles of moldy mattresses. Inside, it smelled like onions, BO, and waste. I could barely breathe. Garbage was literally floor to ceiling and a tunnel was carved through it to get to the kitchen. A little more room to walk but not much. Candles were lit everywhere, illuminating the piles of plates with moldy food and tons of insects all over them. The smell was unbearable. The lady insisted that their house was a little messy because someone in the family had recently passed. Well, it was obvious by the smell they had not found him or her in all the garbage yet. Basically I just dropped off the computer and left. I lied and said I could not set it up since they did not have a standard outlet. They really did not. It was 3 wires coming out of the wall which I was not about to touch. The smell was so bad I drove to a Sheetz afterwards and got sick repeatedly in their bathroom. I then took off all my clothes, threw them out, and drove home to take multiple showers and change before going back into work. I could still smell it for a day afterwards and for weeks in the work vehicle. You know the show, Hoarders? I have seen all the episodes and not one single house came close to the house I mentioned above. Not one. I also had a house with a toothless mullet lady who let her pet boa constrictor roam around the house and she never warned me about it. She chased me out of the house when she found out I picked it up, it was so heavy, and put it in a closet until I was done setting her computer up. I had no choice. I discovered the thing while I was on the ground under her desk hooking up wires. It was looking right at me. I worked in moving most high school summers. I got a few stories. From bad evictions, hoarders to people with unknown whereabouts, but one eviction was both bad and sad. We got an eviction call and I was with 2 co-workers on it. An apartment. Should not take long. We enter the place and immediately we are hit by an awful smell, burnt horror. A father and son lived at this place, and there was some sort of fire in the unit. Burnt junk everywhere. We had to gather any usable stuff we could and load it on the truck. That was the bad part. The sad part was that I knew the son from high school. He was a loner and I think he was picked on as well. He started the day in his pajamas on the couch. We asked him to please move so we could move the burnt couch. He did. He just moved down to their car and slept in there. I did not see him in school after that day. I felt awful that he had to see me there. Bad enough the situation he was in. Seeing someone from high school clean up your home could not have been any good for him. My so works for a man who owns and rents out about 600 houses in our city, mostly in low-income areas, and they have to do this a few times a week. They will wake up at 5 a.m. and meet the cops at the house that they are about to take all of the stuff out of. These people have had at least 30 days to get out, if not longer, but many times they are still there and definitely are not happy when 2 strange men walk into their house at 6 a.m. with the cops and start throwing their things on the street. He has seen some pretty weird things, mostly just really sad though. One story that sticks out in my mind is one where they went to clear a house out and when they got there the place was completely destroyed, holes in the walls, 40s all over the floor, needles, you name it. Turns out the house belonged to a mentally challenged guy in his late 20s whose mom had recently passed, so his aunt out of state was paying for his house. He should never have been allowed to live alone in the first place. Everything was fine for a while until some of the gang members in that area figured out what was going on and took over his house and kicked him out on the street. This poor man had been living in his backyard, when they allowed him to stay in the backyard, for about 6 months by the time the eviction went through and everything. Since the man has the mental capacity of a 10-year-old, he is in state custody right now, but every time I think about that story I just want to cry thinking about a 10-year-old out on his own and how scared and confused that poor man must have been. I work for a home alarm company based in Toronto, and although I do not typically have to do installations, I train the installers. On this occasion I did. I was required to do an emergency install at a customer's home in Hamilton because all the other installers were busy. When I got to the customer's house, everything seemed very normal. It was a new place and the main floor was nice with a big home theater and a big fish tank. The customer was about 28 to 33 years old and seemed nice enough. I informed the customer that I needed access to his router to install a security camera on his front door. He said it was in his basement, so I headed toward the door that led to the basement. As I was walking there, he said to me, "I must warn you, my basement is a dungeon." Without thinking too much of it, I said okay and proceeded downstairs. When I got there, it was a bit much to take in at first. It had things I had never seen before, and I have seen a lot on the internet. I proceeded to install the system, which only took a few minutes. The place was very clean. It even had a sanitary station for accidents and such. He left me down there alone for a few minutes. When I was finished, the customer told me that I was the first person to come to the house for work and not leave immediately freaked out. I said, to each their own, as long as it is not in use while I am here, it does not bother me. To top it off, as I was leaving, his girlfriend started to come downstairs pretty much barely dressed. I am afraid I am the resident who has traumatized a Trodi. I have a full-size, not real, anatomy skeleton from 1960s Czechoslovakia in my apartment. Unfortunately, because he is 60 years old, he sometimes needs repairs. Those repairs are really annoying because his joints are fully articulated, so I needed to get specific parts for it, and his foot fell off when my nephew was trying to put socks on him. I had ordered the bolts and hardware for the whole skeleton because I figured I would give him a proper spring clean, and all the stuff had arrived. So I pulled him apart and gave him a good soak in the sink on one of my only days off work. Same day I booked all the stuff around the house to be fixed. The smoke detector man came in and saw a ribcage laid out on my lounge room rug, and a skeleton arm and hand artfully dipped into the kitchen sink. Sorry dude. I work as a parole officer. Most of my clientele are either of poor mental health or are active drug users. Here are some of the things I have come across that were particularly memorable. An elderly woman living in an apartment with a full-size filled blow-up jacuzzi located in the middle of her very small living room, surrounded on all sides by mirrors. I had some concerns that it would be a structural issue for the unit block. An apartment of a very unwell man where every piece of furniture was on its side and exclusively blocking entrances to other rooms. There was a fish tank that was black, and the entire place smelled like rotting fish. An apartment of a gentleman that had the interior roof completely covered in black mold. Like 100% coverage. It stunk. An apartment where absolutely every surface was graffitied, every window smashed, and every belonging damaged. No carpet, destroyed kitchen, just complete annihilation. A mattress on the living room floor in front of a door with no lock. A house which, upon arrival, turned out to be a meth lab that had burned down several days earlier. A house that was part of an inheritance dispute, where the resident had physically locked all entrances with heavy chains and padlocks and had to squeeze out of a tiny gap in one window to get in and out. Particularly memorable because he clearly had an ongoing dispute with his neighbor who had an impeccable front lawn and had drawn a property line using pegs and rope. There was extremely extensive lawn damage covering my client's yard, but it was suspiciously absent following the lines of the property. Also many drug dens and hoarders' houses, but they become surprisingly boring and routine after a while. Tested a smoke detector in a posh and rich area. Went up to the apartment on the top floor. I did not know the owner had bought the entire level and turned it into their penthouse. Very unassuming. Walk into a maid greeting me and bringing me to the owner's wife. The owner was away. I had never seen any house so beautiful. Giant oil paintings, a 20-meter long hallway with a dining table almost the full length. An extremely expensive looking mirror above the table, traveling the whole way down the corridor. Crystal decanters and glassware, amazing furniture straight out of the early 1900s, the whole shebang until we reached the master bedroom. I am standing outside the door as the maid says, "Wait here please," and she goes to speak to the wife. I take a peek, sorry had to, and she is this 60-plus-year-old drunk with a cocktail in hand in a silk robe, straight out of a movie rich wife who has just woken up, gotten a few drinks in and I assume Valiums. Yes, that is fine, he can come in a drunken slur. I walk in, taxidermy all over the walls, gigantic bed that would fit a harem, Persian rug. I almost lost it, carefully placed my ladder and tried not to damage anything. Changed the battery and said thanks, all done. Just an odd vibe to be around considering I was born and raised in low-economy housing commission where I have reported a meatied-up drug dealer that almost seriously hurt their wife and seen two neighbors, different occasions, perish in their burned-down apartment. Maybe not strange for others, strange for me. Felt like a movie. A few years ago I was volunteering with the city council helping people clean their houses after the neighborhood I lived in had been flooded. One house belonged to a Chinese couple who ran the local convenience store. They had asked our crew to help remove water-damaged carpet from the ground floor rooms of their house so it could be thrown away. As we were removing this carpet, we realized that it ran in one piece under a closed door and into a locked room, so we asked the lady of the house if she wanted us to cut it off at the door and leave whatever was in the locked room behind, or if she wanted to open the room and have us remove the carpet in there also. She responded, "I will check with my husband what to do. That is his special room." This led to some nervously puzzled looks from our crew. What does a middle-aged Chinese man who owns a convenience store keep in his special room? Eventually the wife came back with a set of keys and told us that we could remove the carpet in the room, and she unlocked the door. We all crowded around as the door opened to reveal a room with carpet up the walls, a mirror ball on the ceiling, a stage at one end with a PA standard sound system, a projector, and in the corner just about the fanciest karaoke machine I had ever seen. Special room indeed. I used to install Dish Network for a living. I was installing for an elderly lady who complained that her sister's TV always showed the same thing hers did. I had a 2 TV installation order so I figured that would be okay. I finished the installation and was demonstrating the system when she looked at the full-length mirror and complained that her sister's TV was still showing the same thing. Noped out of there as quick as I could and left notes on the account in case she called in. When I was in college I was a pizza delivery driver for a small local pizzeria in a very upscale area, and while I saw some weird and cool stuff, this one stands out and it takes place over a couple of weeks. When we weren't out on a delivery, the drivers answered the phones to take orders, and I took an order from an obviously drunk man. A few days later I took another order from the same guy, and again he was very drunk. A few days after that I came into work and there was a message by the phones not to take orders from his address because he had written bad checks to pay for his pizzas. He called again, clearly drunk, and I told him we couldn't take his order because of the bad checks, but he begged me and sounded like he was crying, so I said it was okay if he paid cash. Another driver was sent with the pizza with strict instructions to accept only cash. About 20 minutes later the driver called to say the guy didn't have any cash and wanted to be driven to an automated teller machine, so I told the driver to come back. When he got back he was almost in tears because the guy was a mess, completely wasted with bottles scattered all over his beautiful place, so I put the pizza on top of the oven since after the shift we got to eat the mistakes. The guy called back, crying and begging for food, and I told him there was nothing I could do, but he said he hadn't eaten in a long time, so I caved and told him I'd give him the pizza after the shift if nobody wanted it. A few hours later the pizza was still on the oven, so I drove it over to his house. I knocked on the door and could hear something going on inside, but there was no answer, and as I turned to leave the door opened and he invited me in. I tried to decline because I just wanted to hand him the food and go, but he insisted he wanted to pay me. We walked into the kitchen and there must have been 100 empty vodka bottles, and while he poured himself another vodka and grabbed his checkbook he offered me a drink that I declined, then apologized for how he'd answered the door and said some women he'd been paying to visit had been coming over and taking things. In the middle of writing the check we were making small talk, and I don't recall exactly how it came up, but I told him he needed to get some help, like rehab. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, he got really scared and shushed me, and he said it was probably one of those women coming back to take more. The door opened and a woman walked in, and I was really freaked out, thinking it might be one of the same women coming back and that it could be dangerous, but she was obviously startled by my presence too. It was his wife. She told me she was his wife and wanted to know who the heck I was, and I told her I was just delivering pizza. Once we got everything sorted out she was a bit dubious but pleasant, and she told me his sad story. He'd fallen off the wagon, so she left and knew all about the women he'd been paying to visit, and she'd frozen his money. She wrote me a personal check for the pizza with a generous tip, which I cashed, and after giving the pizzeria its cut I split the tip with the other driver, about $10 each. A few days later I was back at work and the boss handed me a letter from the woman, thanking me and a note to my boss and saying my kindness convinced her husband to go back into rehab. My boss asked what I was thinking and said it was none of my business to get involved, and I got fired. I own and operate my own heating and air conditioning company, and that experience combined with working for other, larger contractors over the last 10+ years has had me work in thousands of people's homes doing service and sales throughout a very large service area. I have been in homes ranging from multi-million-dollar places where I do not even meet the owner because they want privacy, to single-wide trailers where there may have been a meth lab in the back room. The creepiest thing happened when I was in my very early 20s, fresh into the trade. I pulled up to a manufactured home secluded in the backcountry that had boarded windows and no stairs to the porch. Thinking I was at the wrong house, I started pulling away when a very large man around 30 years old came running out, yelling that I was in the right place. I walked into the home and was overwhelmed with a putrid stench. The home was not filthy, but it was cluttered to the point of borderline hoarder status. While I was working on the furnace, the dude was playing Call of Duty on a 60-inch plus flat screen at full volume with heavy bass on a very loud surround sound system. He was so caught up in the action he was screaming at the television like he was in live combat. When I finished diagnosing the problem, I walked into the living room and he looked at me like he had forgotten I was there, with a terrified look on his face. I asked if I could talk to him for a minute so I could give him the rundown and a quote. He walked up to me, and as I started explaining the work done and the quote, it was like I was talking to a brick wall, complete nothingness in his eyes. After I finished, he just stared at me through an awkwardly long moment of silence. I kinda waved at him like, "Hey man, you alright?" Eventually he snapped out of it and just handed me a credit card, so I told him okay, let me do the repairs and we will square up the bill after. He nodded, went back to the couch, and cranked Call of Duty again. I finished the work and walked back into the living room with the invoice, and this time he jumped up and yelled, "What the heck man, you cannot just walk up behind me like that." Dumbfounded, I apologized and let him know I was done with the work. He signed the invoice and I gave him his copy. He then apologizes for blowing up and shifts into normal human mode, telling me he is a Middle Eastern war vet with post-traumatic stress disorder and sometimes can be a bit edgy or jumpy. He went on to tell me that he lives out there alone with very minimal human contact and that I was the first person he had seen in a long time. He started telling me more about himself and how his injuries sustained in the service keep him confined to the house. I could tell he was enjoying the human contact at this point, so I hung around and chatted with him for a bit. After a little while, he pulled out a bag of weed and mentioned that he uses medical cannabis for relief. He asked if I wanted to smoke one with him, and I politely declined since I was at work and needed to drive. He got kind of offended, but I thanked him and let him know I needed to get going. He asked if I could just hang out for a minute longer, and feeling sympathetic, I obliged. Now this is where things got really weird. He smoked a couple bowls while holding relatively normal conversation, then out of nowhere he started going on about how his wife, family, and friends had basically abandoned him and how much he resented all of them for it. Feeling legitimately bad for the dude, I kept talking with him for a bit and tried to steer the conversation away from such a dark place. Now he was really baked, and suddenly I saw that lifeless look in his eyes again. He stopped talking and started just staring at me. Feeling a bit alarmed, I told him I had really better get going, when all of a sudden he said something like, "I see things, man." I replied, "What do you mean?" He said, "Beings, man. Figures. They are constantly watching me and make my life a living hell." Not knowing what to say, I just kind of replied, "Oh, that is really rough. Do you see a professional about this kind of thing?" He said something like, "I tried. They tell me that I am the problem when I know it is not me, it is them, the beings. They are everywhere. They are all around us, right now as we speak." I told him, "No, brother, it is just me and you here right now, it is all good." He said, "What, you cannot even see them?" And I told him, "No, we are good man, it is just us." He started getting a fiery look in his eye and said, "You are just like the rest of them, telling me I am the crazy one. You all try to put me on this medication rather than just listen to me." Starting to feel spooked, I told him the kind of stuff like, "Hey, I am on your side, my dude, and they are just trying to help you. I think you should trust your doctors." I started to move toward the door and let him know I was gonna head out and that I hoped he found relief. He jumped up and went off on me about how I was just like the rest of them and I was just going to leave him up there all alone to pass away. Feeling a combination of threatened and bad for the dude, not knowing what to do, I tried to comfort him some more and de-escalate, as I could see he still had that wild look in his eye. He followed me toward the door, rambling more about the things he sees and how everyone is against him. I noticed a small arsenal of guns right next to the door and started to go into panic mode, thinking he might do something really crazy. He followed me outside, so I turned around and tried to shake his hand and part ways. He started walking to my side like he was going to try to get behind me, so I was like, "What are you doing, dude?" while he was still rambling. I said forget it, made a beeline for my truck to get out of there. He followed me at a fast walking pace, still rambling as he stared me down while I got into my truck and reversed away as quickly as possible. As I drove off I still saw him standing there looking really unhinged. This happened about 8 years ago, so I am a bit blurry on some of the details, but it was probably one of the more unsettling experiences I have had. There was only a short period when I felt like we were actually communicating on a normal level, and after he got really baked he just lost it. Not only was it unsettling, but it was sad. I still feel legitimately bad for this dude and hope he was able to find relief and happiness. I notified my office staff of what happened and that they might want to notify the proper authorities for a welfare check, and to my knowledge they did, though I am not sure if anything ever came of it. One thing is for certain, anyone with a combination of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and likely schizophrenia definitely should not use cannabis. I am a regular cannabis enthusiast myself and am really glad I did not smoke with that dude, because I would not have been able to handle that situation if I had been stoned out of my mind. So yeah, that story ended up being a bit longer than I expected. I have had all sorts of crazy stuff happen while working in people's homes, but that one really sticks out in my mind.